Digging Deeper Without the Coalface, the podcast that shares the incredible stories of the talented and passionate people in our industry. And it's now time for this week's episode of Digging Deeper Without the Coalface. It's your host, Jessica Rouse.
We're thrilled to be recording live from the bustling floors of the International Mining and Resources Conference 2025 at the ICC Sydney. We're here at their exclusive podcast zone known as OnAir IMARC. Our next guest is Nick Jorss. He's loud and proud about coal, started Coal Australia, of course, and was the boss, or is the boss, of Bowen Coking Coal. Very happy to have him join us on this episode. Nick, how are you?
Great, thanks, Jess. Great to be here.
Lovely to have you down south.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely. I don't get here that often, but I enjoy it when I do.
What is the feeling up north at the moment? Obviously, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, look, I think people are starting to get pretty concerned about what's happening to our industry, and that's kind of starting to penetrate into the broader consciousness, you know, not just in the mines and the mining communities. But my sense of it is, and the sort of work we do shows that people are starting to understand that maybe, you know, the previous Labor government pushed this industry too far with their super royalty grab, you know, up to 40% of revenue, which is the highest rate in the world, is not conducive to not only new investment but keeping existing mines going. So, yeah, I think, look, there's a little bit of concern. I mean, there's an Olympic kind of boom coming, so there's still a bit of froth and bubble. But certainly in those regions, what we're sensing, what I'm sensing is, you know, people are a bit worried about the future because basically most of the big miners are not making money at the moment and still paying billions in royalties.
Yeah, exactly. And you just mentioned it's penetrating into communities outside the mining companies. Well, it is. We saw BMA put off a whole lot of workers. Other companies are starting to do the same.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sad state for Queensland because the coal industry really is the backbone of the state. You know, It's the engine room economically and provides an awful lot of jobs, you know, not just the direct jobs. You know, tens of thousands of direct jobs, but hundreds of thousands of indirect jobs. And they say, you know, it's a cliche, but they say, well, Brisbane's the biggest mining town in Queensland, coal mining town, and it is. You know, I think if you walk around and look in Brisbane where I live, none of that prosperity is really there to that extent without coal. So, yeah, I think it does penetrate, and people are starting to kind of, just wake up to it a little bit that maybe we've pushed this industry a little bit too far.
Yeah. And I want to go back a couple of steps. You started Coal Australia, something all of our listeners should be very, very familiar with. Why?
Look, I mean, even going predating that, I mean, I'm not a lifetime coal miner. I started Stanmore Coal in 2008 and listed that, and that went very well. And you know, we had a fair royalty regime at the time. You know, I got involved early in Bowen Coking Coal, and that we had a similar playbook, you know, buy assets at the bottom. Unfortunately, you know, price hasn't spiked, but also, you know, costs have gone up tremendously and we're just paying these enormous royalties. So in June 2022, Cameron Dick, the then Treasurer, imposed the highest royalties in the world on Queensland coal miners. So ever since then, it's been a hard slog. So for our business, you know, Bowen Coking Coal, and I'm still, you know, nominally the chair, but unfortunately, you know, tragically, it's in administration and receivership. You know, we couldn't handle that load. We started up just at that time in mid-2022, so we didn't get the good times that came before that, you know, with the price spikes up to $670 US to top up our balance sheet. So we just got the downside of paying royalties. So in the end, we'd incurred $120 million in royalties before we'd made our first profit as we started up. And it's not unusual not to make a profit the first sort of, you know, couple of years as you start up. But you know, we asked for relief from the government, from the new government, or at least a delay in payments on the royalties, and we didn't get that. So, long way of saying that got me a little bit cranky, and so, you know, I just thought, well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, you know, we've got the biggest, most productive industry in Queensland, second biggest export in Australia, sometimes the biggest, depending on the coal price. And we're crucifying it with these royalties. So just chatted to a few fellow kind of CEOs and chairmen of coal companies, much bigger than ours, I might add. But, you know, after a little bit, there was a consensus definitely that we needed to do something. And nothing had been done proactively for the coal industry individually. I mean, we've got QRC, which does a great job. We've got Minerals Council also very pleased with what they do. But they don't purely represent coal, which is an issue. So when there's an issue that affects just coal miners, it's hard to get them as wound up about it.
Yeah.
So, since the Australian Coal Association was kind of snuffed out 15 years ago, we haven't had a direct representation. So just got them in a room, had a few beers and said, yep, let's, what about we start standing up for ourselves? It always makes me laugh when people say there's this kind of giant evil fossil fuel industry, cigar smoking captives of industry or whatever. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth, right? The coal companies I see and know, and they're reluctant to stand up for themselves, because they get crucified by shareholders or whatever. So there's been a sort of a keep your head under the radar attitude, but that hasn't really worked, I think. So just kind of got people together, and then we struck a model as to what would work in terms of funding it. Brought in a lot of associate members, so not just coal miners, but also all the suppliers. And it'd be great to get some more out of IMARC today, because it's the one industry, one ecosystem really everybody feeds off. We've got to keep the mining industry strong, keep the coal industry strong in Queensland. So that was the intent, and I think it's worked out pretty well. We've now got great coverage nationally. We're just running more campaigns. We've got a lot of work to do, because we started well behind the eight ball. We sort of haven't really talked about coal publicly for a long time. One of the big issues at the start was getting people comfortable around talking about thermal coal. Because a lot of the met coal guys are saying, no, well, we're still making coal, we don't want to talk about thermal. But really, as I say, it's like they're after all of us, the activists. Which one the alligator eats last. So, if you've got a good story to tell, whether it's thermal or met, let's just tell it. Let's put it together as coal, which is what we're doing, and it's being very successful. It's
definitely cutting through. I mean, you talk to younger people, my generation and younger, and about what Coal Australia is doing, and it's like something has clicked, like it makes sense. How crucial this industry is and what it actually does for us every day.
Yeah, I think, the rare occasion I'd speak to politicians along the way, and they'd say, well, why would we stand up for the industry if you don't stand up for yourself? And so, and don't get me wrong, there's been some good work done by some of the existing industry bodies, and also some of the individuals, who running coal companies have been vocal, but it's hard to do it on your own. Yeah. So I think getting together and saying, well, we're a critical industry, we're producing a critical mineral, frankly, that supports, not only keeps the lights on, keeps our prices down, keeps our energy reliability going, but also, creates the steel that we build everything out of. Everything from renewables through to infrastructure, through to Olympic stadiums and everything else. Without Queensland's met coal industry, none of that happens. And I think there's just some sort of obvious points that, because we haven't been in the debate for 15 years, nobody's made. And I think a lot of people don't actually realise what we do.
Exactly. Yeah. Michelle from Future Coal was here a little bit earlier today having a chat about what they do, and she congratulated you guys on, giving the coal community the courage, I guess, to stand up for itself.
I think that's right. I mean, it's pride. And look, I'm a big fan of Michelle. She's doing great work in Future Coal. And I'm actually speaking on stage with her tomorrow, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, I think about it as pride. We should be so proud of our industry, what we do, what we provide. The jobs, the prosperity, the low-cost energy, the steel we make, all that sort of stuff. Pretty much nothing happens without our industry. And so it's really instilling that pride and restoring that pride that I think we've enabled people. Give them permission to say, I can go to the barbecue and say, I work in coal mining. And feel pride rather than some other emotion, like shame or something that the activists would like us to feel. So, it's just starting a movement, right? Once you start it, people are on board and they're sort of like happy. Well, someone's speaking for me, I can speak for myself. Yeah. And ultimately, it's incumbent on all of us to stand up for our industry. And I know so many people that feel the same way as we do, not just in our industry but outside. I think the majority of people support. When we do polling, I mean, we actually polled. I find this kind of funny. We polled McMahon, Chris Bowen's seat, Western Sydney, and 83% of people in his electorate, this is before the election, 83% of people said they wanted to use more coal to keep their electricity bills down. So, go figure. So I think the great mass of, great kind of bulk of Australians just want to see low-cost, reliable electricity. Yeah,
exactly. And I feel like Coal Australia has kind of given you a bit more of a platform to talk about this stuff. And there was something that you talked about at the coal industry dinner in Brisbane, I think it was a couple of months ago, that left me and the rest of my team going, what? So take us the Sunrise saga.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I remember 2011, I was running Stanmore Coal, and I remember, there or shortly after, this paper leaked, and it was written by a guy called John Hepburn, who was an ex-Greenpeace guy, and he wanted to start this movement. And the paper was called "Stopping the Australian Coal Export Boom," and it outlined, and I forgot about it for 10 years or more, and I remembered it just like a few months ago, and said, okay, well, let's dig this up. And you go through it, it actually outlines in forensic detail how they're going to destroy the coal industry in Australia, like what the tactics are to stop the coal export boom. Because if you cast your mind back to 2011, I don't know if you're that old, but anyway.
I was just doing the math in my head, and I was like, I was about 50.
Yeah, okay, so maybe not. But anyway, I was certainly around. I'd started Stanmore Coal, and that was going well. But we had, ports that were going to be developed, Dudgeon Point, Wiggins Island, 2, 3, 4, 5 expansions on Abbott Point. We had the Galilee Basin and the Surat Basin. All high-quality coal was going to come to market. Of course, none of that happened. Almost none of that happened, right? We got a kind of a cut-down wicket, and we got a small, Adani mine in the Galilee, but the rest of it not. And obviously some of that was market forces, but what really drove it was this campaign against coal, and it's a very deliberate strategy. You can Google that, stopping the Australian coal export boom, find it. And it's very clear what they were aiming to do. They were aiming to infiltrate all the existing kind of community groups and environmental conservation organisations. So they fund things like Queensland Conservation Council, Australian Conservation Foundation, Mackay, Whitsundays conservation groups, all up and down the coast. They fund hundreds of these things, and then they stand up new ones that sort of sound like they're serious entities, like Surfers for Climate, Farmers for Climate, Doctors for the Environment, all this sort of stuff that they do to put pressure on. And they outline it all in this paper in 2011, what they wanted to do. So, for instance, use the health professionals because they're trusted in the community, so amplify their voices, an anti-coal thing.
Yeah.
Take the social licence, turn coal from something that's seen as dependable, reliable, and cornerstone of the economy into something that's seen as dirty and it's sort of almost untoward. So hit the finance sector. They did that with an entity called Market Forces. Insurance, so they had a campaign called Unfriend Coal, and they went and hit AXA and Allianz and got them to stop financing coal. Then they went through them all. They got to Lloyd's of London, they did them as well. So Unfriend Coal and Insure Our Future. So just a very comprehensive, well-funded campaign. Yeah. I mean, they started out looking for $3 or $4 million. Now they're pulling in $129 million a year, and they're spending more in Australia than the Liberal Party or the Labor Party are on a single issue on trying to get to 100% renewables. What puzzles me is, they're also anti-nuclear. So I don't know. To me, just a bit cynical. But if you really want to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, well, nuclear is your best bet. And they won't tolerate that. If you kind of talk about that, they'll cut your funding off. So it's something that I think not many Australians know, and I think they need to. So we're going to be kind of making a bit more noise about it, just to kind of point out to people this is why. It's easy for people, particularly young people, but even myself, to kind of assume, well, coal's just last century, it's old technology, it's lost its social licence, that's just a natural progression. No, nothing could be further from the truth. Exactly. It's actually a deliberate campaign against it.
We were actually in the newsroom of one of my other jobs. There was something going on that day in the news about climate or net zero or something, and we all of a sudden were bombarded with, there were more than a dozen emails from similar groups, like it was Farmers for Climate Change, this thing for climate change, all the same PR person, just this one targeted approach. And it's like, how dumb do you think we are? We're going to fall for that?
Got a centralised infrastructure. And as I say, I don't think the average Australian necessarily buys it, but their job is to influence the politicians and the journalists, and the institutions, the universities and the schools, and I think they've done a good job of that. I have to hand it to them. They've done an extremely good job. If you look at, the tragedy of it all here, and this is what I say is a massive economic own goal, is if you look at our coal production since 2011, since I wrote that paper, it's pretty much flatline. I think it's up 20% since 2011. It's coming off now. Indonesia has tripled in that time. Yeah. And Mongolia has gone from basically 0 to 60 million tonnes a year. So, the Indonesian coal industry has just rocketed past Australia as a coal exporter. Their coal, good luck to them, but their coal's not as high quality, or as good for the environment as ours is. and they're now twice the size of our industry.
Yeah.
To the extent where they're coming back and buying our met coal mines that our big miners don't want. Which, again, it's a free world. No issues with that, except to say, well, it's all been driven by this agenda, very overt agenda from Sunrise Project.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of their allies.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just find it interesting that's
It is
happening.
very interesting. And we mentioned Bowen coking coal a few minutes ago, but what's the latest there? Is there any chance of anything restarting, happening down the track? Obviously, you're in administration there.
Yeah, look, I would never say never. I mean, what we all need, the whole industry now, I mean, I think, I did the maths on our biggest coal producers, BMA, Anglo, Stanmore, Coronado, and Peabody, and in the last 6 months they all lost money. I mean, my count, BMA lost over $1 million a day. So we all need a bit of a price increase, and Bowen's no different in that sense. It's now running very, very efficiently, very low cost. We've cut, I say we, it's not really me anymore. I'm sort of their minister without portfolio. I'm still nominally the chair, but don't really have any power. So it's now running at half the rate. So we've lost about half the jobs, maybe 250 jobs gone. But they're just sort of picking the eyes out of doing, keeping it going while we see, or while the administrators, receivers see if they can find a buyer for it. So, I'm still hopeful that will continue. Those jobs will continue. I feel dreadful for the shareholders that lost their money, and it wasn't a lot of fun for me and the team either. I can tell you. But we gave it our absolute all, and in the end of the day, we couldn't get over that royalty hurdle. That was probably the thing that killed it. I mean, not the only thing, but that was the kind of, if you like, the bale of hay that broke the camel's back. It was just too big a burden to carry.
It feels like there's a lot of, particularly down here, the industry feels quite unsure or uncertain, I guess. I don't know if it's a similar feeling up north, but I mean, we had a Dartbrook coal mine in the Hunter Valley has also gone into administration. We're having all sorts of problems with getting mine extensions approved by government. It just all seems really unsure.
Yeah, look, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's just it's tragic to me. We should be celebrating this industry. We're not. We've got so much work to do. We're literally just at the start. We've lost so much ground. We haven't been in the fight. We haven't even laced our boots on to get on the field of play. Yeah, really. So more work to do. But I'm very optimistic. I think we've got great assets, great resources. We've let our cost base get entirely out of control. I mean, I was speaking at a Woodmac, next to a Woodmac guy the other day, and he showed the cost curve for Queensland. I think it might have been 5 years ago. We were down the bottom of the cost curve. Big Queensland mines now are in the top of the cost curve. So we've definitely shifted to be a less competitive position. And royalties are only part of that story. So we've got some work to do, but I think, once we stop demonising coal and we actually start celebrating what we're doing, because coal demand keeps going up. That's what we can't forget, 8.8 billion tonnes, I think, last year. And every year, I track it. Every year the IEA used to come out and say, this is going to be the peak year for coal, next year it's going down, which was wishful thinking. Every year it goes up. It is a really useful form of energy, and you can't make new steel out of anything else, really, at the moment. Green hydrogen is not a thing. That's just a waste of taxpayers' money, which they're wasting a lot on at the moment, and we'll live to regret. But so it's such it's transportable. It's high energy. It's low. It's high energy density. So not quite as high as nuclear. Obviously, that's incredible. But in terms of the footprint and impacts, this is the other thing. Like, I've had people come to me from Western Victoria saying, and there's no coal in Western Victoria, or none that I know about, saying, "Can you come here, Coal Australia, come to us and demonstrate how coal can save our communities?" Because they're getting smashed by these transmission lines and big, wind turbines and solar. Yeah, absolutely smashed. If they object to it, and the government has the right to enter their property anyway, their farm, and fine them $12,000 if they don't like it. Same in New South Wales there. So people are turning back and going, well, where's a source of energy we can use that's clean? Like, I think modern coal-fired power plants emit nothing but steam and a bit of CO2. And the modern ones actually are on par with an open cycle gas plant, so in terms of the CO2 emissions. But how can we find an energy source that's clean and cheap and reliable and keeps our bills down, but also doesn't destroy our landscape, our food bowls and our remnant forests, like the work being done in rainforest reserves in Queensland to demonstrate that they are carving up literally hundreds of thousands of hectares in total across Australia, and in central Queensland, North Queensland, like thousands and thousands of hectares of koala territory and sugar glider territory. There's bulldozing it for wind farms. And then you look at, well, what's under our feet? What do we have?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason we didn't go nuclear in the 1970s after the oil price shock was because we had hundreds of years of cheap coal. We still do. We've just turned our back on it. So that's where I think, there's a bit of a realisation coming, and we're just sort of playing into that.
Yeah, there's definitely, things we can change to do things better. I mean, the Healy coal-fired power station conversation seemed to come a few years ago, and I don't think I've heard about it since.
No, well,
there's so many options.
I mean, high energy, low emissions, it's an acronym, but effectively, what they call ultra supercritical coal plants, very high heat rate and, very low emissions.
Yeah.
And with all the bag houses and, electrostatic precipitators and stuff, and they take out the SOx and the NOx, the sulfur dioxide, the nitrous oxide. They take out all the particulates. So there's basically no traditional pollutants. It's just a bit of CO2.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have that conversation as well, right? Because we've got energy prices now the highest in Asia.
Yeah.
And we sell our cheap gas and coal into our neighbours, and then we buy back, wind and solar and batteries from China, which drive our bills up. And that's demonstrable, because you look at, what happens in every country that's gone more than sort of 25-30% wind and solar, and their bills have gone through the roof. And we're at that tipping point now. We're 33% wind and solar. And from here, it gets a lot harder, right? It just gets very, very expensive, because every additional bit of wind and solar you put in, you've got to back up and shift in time with batteries or pumped hydro, and then you've got to transmit it through space with transmission. So it's just a very expensive exercise.
Yeah. Well, Nick, what's something you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I guess a bit of positivity and hope. It's easy to kind of feel down the dumps about our sector and our industry and just mining in general. I mean, we've been absolutely smashed over the last 10 or 15 years by a concerted activist campaign. I would say just get on the Coal Australia website, sign up to Coal Australia at coalaustralia.com. Get all your friends on. People is power. Politicians only listen once you've got the people. We've already got 100,000 people signed up and supporting us. We want to bring that bigger and bigger, and we can see where that split sits by seat and by electorate, and so that's useful when we're talking to politicians. So definitely do all of that. Inform yourself. There's information on the website there as well on what coal does and what it doesn't do. And then be confident, be loud and proud, go on the journey and just get out there in the barbecue and talk to people and say, this is what I do and this is why I'm proud of it. And you'll be amazed. Like, very few people really challenge me. I wear my Coal Australia cap around West End and Highgate Hill in Brisbane, where I live, and we've had a green member for a long time up there. And we built the City on Rocks and Coal T-shirt. Get on the website, find the merch. That's fantastic.
It is
Wear
such
some
good
of that.
merch.
Absolutely. Get your subscription to Coalface. Absolutely. We sponsor that as well. Just be loud and proud and get the conversation going. We're going to win this because there's no other way. Basically, the economics and the physics of trying to transition to 100% renewables or even 82% is impossible. Doesn't work. It's just a question of how much pain we want to inflict on ourselves and the economy in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jess.